Yes, God is good all the time. Yes, if you're walking through the valley, there are shadows all around. Do not fear, He will guide you. He will keep you safe and sound. He has promised to never leave you.
Good morning, Ferges Free Methodist Church, and welcome to Sunday morning worship this Independence Day weekend. We hope you're enjoying the freedoms of this nation wherever you may be, and also glad to see that you're interested in being in worship together with community this morning. We hope that you have a healthy and a happy Sunday wherever you may be, and we're just glad that you're here and know that our prayers and our presence with you spiritually as you are with us as well. So I'm glad to have you here this morning. All righty, folks, if you were here last week, you might remember, there's that word, you might remember that we took a look at a thing called memory, or rather forgetting things and remembering things, and we realize that forgetting and not remembering are not exactly the same thing. That is, to forget something means it's completely out of your brain. That part of your brain no longer functions, no longer works. It's gone, totally erased. But remembering means that there is something that can be recalled, and we gave the definition to remember is the opposite of dismember. So if your arm is dismembered, it's cut off from your body, you have been dismembered. But if we find it and glue it back on and it works again, then that arm has been remembered. And so as we remember things, they are brought back to us to be part of a whole again. And the way this works sometimes is kind of weird. We can forget certain things and remember other things too. For example, I may remember that you are a scoundrel. You are, and every time I see you, I go, there's that scoundrel. That person brings, I don't like this person. Now, I may have forgotten all the things that you did specifically, but when I see you, I recall the bad feelings, the bad emotions that I have. So I forget the actual things that you did, but I remember your sordid and sinful behavior and reattach it to you every time I see your stinking face or hear of you, right? And so we can forget certain things, but we can still remember and reattach things. And we can do that in a positive way too, as well. History is like that, because history is a remembering and a not forgetting. We may not know all the facts of the past, but we remember or can reattach certain feelings from the past to us today. Our Independence Day celebrations really are an example of that. We may not remember everything that happened on the 4th of July, on that first one, or our celebrations. But when I was a kid, our 4th of July celebrations at school and at home were kind of a big deal. And our parents made them a big deal. We would talk about and around the fact that this was a country that was formed from another country called England. And then we were told the stories of how our families got here, that we were immigrants, most of us, and we remembered how our families got here as best we could. Parents would talk about that. We would tell the stories to our kids about Paul Revere, and we would tell the stories about the shot heard round the world, and we would tell the stories about the Concord Bridge and the Boston Tea Party. And then we were told these stories that it wasn't just a party day. We were trying to remember, to reattach our history to us today. It was a teaching event for our children and a remembrance for adults. And we were taught when we did the fireworks explosion that those explosions remind us of the rocket's red glare. That's what the rocket's red glare looks like of the Revolutionary War and the War of 1812. That we became free from English tyranny and became a free country. And we were reminded of all our freedoms. The parents would talk to us about, because of this, you are free to go to school, and you were free to go to church, and you were free to do this. And it was a great norming event culturally for us to celebrate who we were as a nation. And I don't even know if we do that anymore. I don't have kids in school for a long time, and so I don't know what's going on anymore. Sometimes on the outside, I think the 4th of July is just an opportunity for people to get together and blow stuff up because it's fun. And there's no other attachment to the holiday other than the fact that it's basically just a day off and it's fun. And this week I was reading that in this nation, a lot of people are using the 4th of July celebration to teach their children how bad this country is and how it is not a good country, which is certainly different from the way I was taught whenever we celebrated Independence Day. Now, last week we also discovered that there is nothing that God really forgets. God's memory, like God, is perfect, but that once our sins are confessed and forgiven, they are no longer attached to us. God does not remember them. So when He sees you, He does not remember or reattach your sins. So He goes, that's that despicable sinner. What He sees is someone that He loves regardless. And so they become not attached to us. And that's grace. This is God loving us in spite of us and because of Jesus. And we walk in that kind of grace in the presence of God every single day. That God sees us as someone that God has chosen to love. Now, speaking of history lessons, I'll give you a couple this morning. Once upon a time, there was an author by the name of Ernest Hemingway. Some of you may have heard of his name or have read some of his books. And he defined courage. Courage was what he was talking about as grace under pressure. Although that's not really what he said. He was actually doing an interview for the New Yorker magazine, and they were talking about courage and what Hemingway actually said was talking about, he used the word guts as opposed to courage. He says, is basically guts is grace under pressure. So that when you have pressure on you to do something that's not right, you have the guts or the courage to stand up to it. And he says, well, that's just grace under pressure. Courage is grace under pressure. So whether you remember it as guts or courage, I think the meaning is the same thing. Later, you might remember a guy by the name of John F. Kennedy. He was a senator from Massachusetts, and he became the President of the United States. And he used this line in a book that he wrote called Profiles in Courage, about what courage is under pressure. And what Kennedy did, he took the line of 8 United States senators over the history of the United States, and he looked at their lives where they were under tremendous pressure to do things that they didn't believe in, do things that they thought were wrong for the country, and how they stood up for their beliefs. Some of them lost their jobs. They were not reelected. They were disdained. Everybody said bad things about them. But these were folks who were leaders in the country who were so convicted of their convictions, if you will, that they stood up for them even if they weren't popular. And it cost many of them their jobs and families and all sorts of things. But he wrote this as an example to us. And I think it also, when he did the research on this, it helped himself, it helped John Kennedy, President Kennedy, to help him to understand that he would like to be a senator. He would like to be a leader like that would stand up for his convictions in spite of. I got another couple examples for you. This is one I read about this week. I've not heard of this guy before. Maybe you have. His name is Witold Pilecki. He's Polish, actually. That might have given you away. He was a Polish cavalry officer. He was an intelligence agent. And he was a resistance leader during World War II. And when the Nazis invaded Poland, they started rounding up the Jews and putting them in concentration camps. The locals knew that something bad was happening there, but they weren't sure. They didn't know how bad it was. Many of them didn't. So this guy, as kind of a spy, if you will, he's a member of the Polish military. They've been run over by the Nazi. He volunteers to get rounded up and thrown in a concentration camp to see what it's like. Now, that was his mission, was go be an undercover spy in a concentration camp, which means you have to go to the concentration camp as a prisoner. And he volunteered to do that. And he spent a couple of years there. And they had a little bit of a scheme, and he was able to smuggle some messages out over the fence to let the authorities know just how bad it was, of course, because the Nazis were keeping that all in. And so even in the war, some of the earliest indications of how bad things were came from someone who was actually living it. Now the thing about Pilecki was, he was not a Jew. He was a Christian. Okay? He volunteered to do this mission for the freedom and to help the war situation for others. He did, one of the few folks who actually escaped the camp, came back to his unit and was able to tell people even more about what was going on. Now, his ability to do that is really grace under a whole lot of pressure. Here's another guy for you. Some of you may have heard of him. His name is Jeremiah Denton. He was an American prisoner of war in Vietnam. In early 1965, when he got there, he was a Navy commander flying missions for the United States Navy, flying the A-6. He'd been there about a month. He got shot down and captured and sent to North Vietnamese prison. He spent 7.5 years in a North Vietnamese prison just trying to stay alive. Somewhere in there, they brought in a crew from another country, and they were interviewing the prisoners, and they wanted the prisoners to go on record talking about how bad America was to be in the war, how well they were being treated by their North Vietnamese captives. And so he's being interviewed, and he was forced to do this. And as he's doing what he can do, he takes his eyes and he blinks out to the camera in Morse code the word torture. And so when the United States intel people watched this and they saw that and they translated that into what he was saying, they realized that regardless of what he was being forced to do or regardless of what he was saying, what was really going on was torture. Now, the ability to have that kind of mental activity and acuity, and even under the pressure, knowing that if you get caught, he would be tortured even more, but he wanted to let people know what was going on. He was speaking out on behalf of others. Now, here's another great thing. When he was one of the senior members of the prisoners, and when he was released, we flew the prisoners out in airplanes back to Clark Air Base in the Philippines, and they got off, and there was this wonderful reunion with all their families. Some of you may remember seeing that. And he was the first one off the airplane, and he was asked to kind of give a word on behalf of all the prisoners who had been released. And so he stands at the microphone and he says this: of all the things he could have said, of all the bitter things he could have said, this is what the man said. He said, we, that is we prisoners, we are honored to have had the opportunity to serve our country under difficult circumstances. We are profoundly grateful to our Commander-in-Chief and to our nation for this day. God bless America. Now, that's some real grace under pressure. He could have talked about being bitter or angry or all the things he went through, but that's not what he chose to do. In fact, he stayed in the Navy, became an admiral. Later on, he ran for Congress. He became a senator out of Alabama and continued to serve his country even after that. And then let's not forget other folks who showed courage and guts and grace under pressure. Don't forget Harriet Tubman, who escaped slavery via the Underground Railroad and then risked enslavement and death, and she went back to the South during the Civil War and led at least 19 trips to take as many as 300 enslaved Americans to freedom, risking her own personal life and limb. That is grace under pressure. Now, all of these folks faced tremendous pressure to give in or to give up, and they did not do that. It was as if their power came right from God to be that kind of strong. Now, here's another example of grace under pressure. It comes from the scriptures. It's out of 1 Samuel. The prophet Samuel was active during the reign of King Saul, the first king of the unified country. Whenever they went from their tribal ways of doing things to they became the one country that we think of as Israel. And the people rejected God and they wanted a king. And God told the people, said, you really don't want a king. If you have a king, he goes crazy every now and then. He's not very moral. I don't care who he is. He's a human being. He's going to tax you. He's going to put you in the military. You're not going to like it. You really should have no king but me, God. And the people said, but we don't want you. We like to be like all the other nations around us, so we want a king. So God, as God often does, gave people what they asked for, and they got King Saul. Now, Saul was not all bad, but he certainly was not all good. And after a while, God became kind of upset with Saul and said, Saul, you got to go. You're not the king. You're not the man after my heart. I'm going to find a man after my own heart that will be the king of Israel. And so he selects David. But for that to happen, some things needed to happen. So God told the prophet Samuel to go and find the next king and anoint him. And that was to be the signal to the people who the new king was. Now this was tough. This was tough, okay? Saul did not want to stop being king. And if Saul had found out that Samuel was going to anoint a king to take his place, Saul would be upset and might have tried to kill Samuel. But Samuel went anyway. Samuel knew that when he went looking for a new king, he might run into people who didn't like Saul, and if they thought the prophet was supporting Saul, they might try to kill the prophet. He also knew he might run into some people who wanted to keep Saul as king, and if they found out he was going to anoint another king, they might want to kill him. And Samuel knew that when it became time to choosing a king, God would be with him, but there would be a lot of pressure for him to say, choose me, choose that guy over there. And he might make people mad with whoever was chosen, and they might kill him. So when Samuel left on this job, it was like everybody between here and there could kill me. And there's just no easy way out of this. That's a lot of pressure, but Samuel, as a man of God, went anyway. That is grace under pressure. And so let's take a look at the scriptures for the story itself. It's in 1 Samuel 16, 1 through 13. And it goes like this. The Lord said to Samuel, how long will you grieve over Saul? I have rejected him from being king over Israel. Fill your horn with oil and set out. I will send you to Jesse the Bethlehemite, for I have provided for myself a king among his sons. And Samuel said, how can I go? If Saul hears of it, he will kill me. And the Lord says, well, we'll do this. Take a heifer with you and say, I have come to sacrifice to the Lord. Invite Jesse to the sacrifice, and I will show you what you shall do. And you shall anoint for me the one whom I name to you. And Samuel did what the Lord commanded. And he came to Bethlehem, and the elders of the city came to meet him trembling and said, do you come peaceably? And Samuel said, peaceably, I have come to offer sacrifice to the Lord. You sanctify yourselves too, and come with me. Come with me to the sacrifice. And he sanctified Jesse and his sons and invited them to the sacrifice. And when they came, he looked on Eliab, one of the sons, and thought, surely the Lord's anointed is now before the Lord. But the Lord said to Samuel, do not look on his appearance or the height of his stature, because I have rejected him. And here's the key words. For the Lord does not see as mortals see. They look on the outward appearance, but the Lord looks on the heart. Then Jesse called Abinadab and made him pass before Samuel. And he said, neither has the Lord chosen this one. Then Jesse made Shammah pass by, and he said, neither has the Lord chosen this one. Jesse made 7 of his sons pass before Samuel, and Samuel said to Jesse, the Lord has not chosen any of these. Samuel said to Jesse, are all of your sons here? And he said, well, there remains the youngest, but he's out keeping the sheep. And Samuel said to Jesse, send and bring him, for we will not sit down until he comes here. He sent and brought him in. Now he was ruddy, and he had beautiful eyes, and was handsome, and the Lord said, rise and anoint him, for this is the one. Then Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the presence of his brothers, and the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon David from that day forward. Then Samuel set out and went to Ramah. So, have you ever had to take a similar leap of faith to do something, to have courage, to have grace, to have guts in the face of pressure? Would your profile be a profile in courage? Or there are those who speak of you who would say, I remember a time when that person was under great pressure to do something that was not right, and they did not do that. And you may have to think about this. Perhaps, you were the new kid in school, and you walk into your first class, and everybody looks at you like you're the new kid in school, and therefore you're we don't like you. And you got to deal with that. You got to make people like you. Maybe you're the new employee. You don't know how anything works, and you got to figure out how to fit in. Maybe it's your first day of military boot camp when they shave your head, take away your identity, and make you wish, like, why am I here? Maybe it was you've gotten a promotion, and now you're in charge. And everybody's looking at you. What do we do? What do we do? What do we do? And you're like, I'm in charge. I will think of something quickly. And you hope that it does. Maybe it was your first sermon, or your 100th sermon, or whatever it may be. You've had a chance where you felt like it was tough to stand up and do something. Maybe you're a member of a wedding couple. You got to take the wedding vows or someone. You have to give the toast. Have you ever had to give the toast at a wedding? You're like, oh man, I'm going to be remembered as a guy that did a bad toast. And they will remember that if you are that guy. Maybe you're a parent. And your children provide you daily challenges where you have to balance teaching with discipline, with love, with mercy, with kindness, with doing the right thing, with being consistent yourself, and with what will everybody else think. No pressure, just make the right decision. We need grace for that, don't we? We all have places where we need grace under pressure. All of these things require a leap of faith. So, we'll take a look, go back to Samuel for a second, then we're going to look at some other examples of how you can be graceful under pressure, okay? The good news from 1 Samuel is this, is that God provides a way. God did not say simply to Samuel, go down there to Bethlehem and find some guy and make him king. If it doesn't work out, everybody blames you. Good luck! God did not do that. God gave Samuel a path to walk, one that would keep him safe, one that allowed him to do what God wanted him to do. And that's true for each of us. With the help of God, each of us can be a profile and encourage. I don't know, you don't think about your profile very much, about how you look from the side, unless you've been in a mugshot. But when you look at someone, we talk about their profiles, we talk about their character. What are they like? Are they courageous? Are they full of grace? And we are each called in our own ways to have a profile that is courageous in grace on behalf of God. So with the help of God, each of us can be a profile and encourage. A lot of times it simply requires prayer. It just simply requires us to be able to give ourselves up to God in prayer and let God take over us. To say, God, I'm in a tough spot. I have to make a hard decision. And I'm conflicted. I don't know what to do. Show me the right way, Jesus. Give me the right things to say. Take me out of the picture. Take me out of the picture. You be my lips. You be my courage. You be my strength. You be my peace. You just be inside of me and let this work for your glory. Sometimes we just have to pray ourselves into that place of strength, even if we don't want to. Now, each of the folks we talked to earlier and their sense of heroic activities, one of the reasons they were able to do that is because they had prepared for it. Courage takes practice. We become courageous in the big things by being courageous in where? In the little things. It's kind of the way it works. We practice being courageous. We practice being full of grace. Each of those folks, we look at their lives and what they had done. They had been trained and God had been leading them. So they were able to be prepared for the big thing when it happens. They knew what God wanted. They had practiced, and this is key, they had practiced a disciplined life. So this new opportunity was simply just the next opportunity. It was the next opportunity God had for them. And Samuel discovers this when he goes to Bethlehem. And it's kind of interesting. They ask him, do you come in peace? And I guess that was a question people had asked. And he says, yes, I come in peace. And then what they really wanted to know was, where does he stand on some of the bigger issues of the day? Where do you stand on who should be king? Samuel, Saul, or someone else? Who do you stand on these particular issues? And I love Samuel's answer. What he says was, hey, I got an idea. Let's all go to church. He says, let's go to church. That wasn't church like we know. It says, let's sanctify ourselves and let's go make a sacrifice. Let's be in an attitude that brings us together as opposed to one that splits us. Don't ask me where I stand. Let's go worship the living God together. And they did. That was a unifying call. And then Samuel has this job to pick out the next king. Now, fortunately, it wasn't Samuel who was doing it; it was God who was doing it. But it still took courage for Samuel. He could have backed out because, whenever you're supposed to pick someone, you ever have to pick somebody, which means you got to not pick people. Like you ever having to pick sides for people? Yeah. Ever be the last person that was ever picked? Yeah. Anybody the first person they were ever picked? Some of you were. You ever have to pick sides? Yeah, some of you the first. I'm always the first person because they know the best right away, man. They don't pick me. I will smite them in the face. They will. Yes. But then when you have to pick people, you ever had that choice between picking your friends and picking, the best person? I mean, like you're picking teams for sports. Well, that person's my friend. We have a lot of fun, but I want if somebody's going to help me win. I want this person over here. You ever been torn between that? Those of you who are competitive were never torn between that. Like friend Schmin, I want to win, right? Yeah, get an amen back there. And some people are like, well, Schmin, I just want to have fun. Come on, friends, let's go out there and have fun. And some people are giving me an amen there, right? And most of us, sometimes we might find ourselves in between. So here's Samuel. He's got all these people to pick from. The village is standing around. Everybody's watching. And he's a man of God. He wants to do the right thing. And he goes through all these tall, good looking, great king people, and none of them. So he says to Samuel, you got anybody else? I mean, anybody? You got any short, little, ugly people? You're giving us these tall, good looking sons. Surely there's got to be a short, ugly son somewhere around here. And Samuel said, well, we got the one guy, we like him so much, we make him do all the work while we're here with you. And so they bring David in, and of course he's the one who's anointed because God sees the heart of people. And grace under pressure for Samuel was to not bend to any of the peer pressure, but was to anoint on behalf of God the next king of Israel. God is always at work developing new profiles of courage for each of us. So I'm going to give you some challenges that we may all face today, okay? And we're going to walk through these, and when you identify one for yourself, you can just raise your hand inside yourself, okay? Because we all have pressure upon us. And if we don't have pressure upon us, then we're just not paying enough attention, okay? We all have pressure upon us. And all of these pressures require a prayerful response, okay? Ways that we can be courageous, okay? So one of them is what I call a radical grace under radical pressure. Radical grace under radical pressure. That is the heroes that we talked about earlier, the prisoners and those kinds of folks. That was so they were in radical situations. Most of us are not in that kind of a situation. But when you're under that kind of a radical pressure, we need to have radical grace, radical courage, radical guts. When you're faced with concentration camps or losing your job for what you believe, you need some radical grace to make that happen. And the prayerful response for that, when you have a radical attack on human goodness, is that God will give us to be strong in the face of that. When there is a radical attack on human goodness, we need God's strength to be strong in the face of that. You may have temptation pressure. We all have temptation. A lot of things that speak to us, and they tell us this will make you happy, but it won't for long. And the temptations, you know how they go. Go ahead, do this, say that, look at that. The whispering of evils in our heart. That happens all the time. We all have temptation pressure. And the key to that, the prayerful response is this. I have been called and baptized to be a holy person. And this behavior does not fit the holiness God has for my life. Say that again. When you find those temptation pressures, and we all will, the prayerful response is, I have been called and baptized to be a holy person. And this behavior does not fit with the holiness God has for my life. And that prayerful response will get rid of the temptations that will sneak into our lives. I have been called and baptized to be a holy person, and this behavior does not fit with the holy life God has called me to have. You may find, and this one sneaks in on us, graceful perspective for artificial pressure. Some of these pressures are real. I kind of name these artificial pressure. You may have pressure to do bad for no good reason. You ever done something bad for no good reason? Maybe it just felt good. Yeah, that was my high school. Yeah, I did that. I knew people. But I mean, we find these things now. If you talk to psychologists, and they disagree because they're psychologists, but they kind of narrow on this. There are 4 basic human emotions. And you may have heard 6 or 12 or whatever. The 4 basic human emotions are this: fear, anger, sadness, and joy. Think about that. 3 out of 4 are negative emotions. Our basic emotions are working against us. Fear, anger, sadness, and joy. And artificial pressure is the pressure that is on us to feel the fear, the anger, and the sadness for no productive reason. Sometimes it's good to be afraid. It gets us out of tough situations, okay? But when we feel pressure to be angry or sad or afraid for no productive reason, that's an artificial pressure. Now, who does that to you? Anybody do that to you? Yeah? Yeah, how about the news? You watch the news, if you pay attention to the news, MSNBC, CNN, whomever, what does the news media really give you? A little bit of data, but mostly they get paid to make you feel angry, afraid, or sad. They are not in the business of making you feel happy or joyful. I've never heard anybody say, I'm feeling kind of down. I want to feel good. Let's watch the news. Doesn't happen. What we hear instead is that the world is bad and it's your fault. So we have this pressure to feel angry, sad, or fearful with no redemption to that. Now here's another artificial pressure, just plain drama. Anybody have any drama in their life? Really? No drama? I need to introduce you to some women I know. Present company accepted, but I know folks. I know folks who live on drama. No, not you, but I know people who just live on drama, right? They do. It's the old, well, she said that he said, and I said this, that they should have done this, and they should be doing that, but they won't because of what they did back in 1982. And because of that, it's not fair, and I feel really bad, and you should feel bad too. And we just get this drama. We're invited to feel bad, angry, sad, or afraid for no productive reason. And our prayerful response is to seek the real source of pain and not the one that's presented. So when you hear drama, you are hearing someone who deep down is feeling fear or anger or sadness. They present it as an invitation to join in the drama, but there's something deeper than that. Here's another one for you. We also have just internal pressure. That's the dialogue that's going on inside you constantly. The spiritual attacks on our beliefs. God doesn't really love you and there is no God. And if God was really good, why are you doing this? Your values are wrong, your beliefs are wrong, your history is wrong, everything is wrong. You're not good enough. You're not worthy. Do this and they'll like you. Don't do that and they'll like you. It doesn't matter what you do, they won't like you. God doesn't really care. We may have physical pain, stress, exhaustion, all these things inside us that attack us. Guts and courage and grace required for that. The prayerful response is to seek God's presence inside us so God's strength will be ours where ours has failed. When we feel those things, we need God's presence in our lives where ours has failed. And finally there's this. What I call, there is a need for communal grace for communal pressure. That's the pressure where groups of people, communities, try to force their ideas and beliefs on another community. You guys are wrong. You guys have to do this. You guys have to let us do this. You guys need to do this. You guys. This communal pressure on another community to conform to the other values. Okay, and that's what I mean by communal pressure. You know what I wish we could do? We sang a song this morning, America the Beautiful. You like that song? I love that hymn. That's a hymn. That's great. It's in our hymn book. Love that hymn. Written back in 1890, I think, 1895, something like that. Been around a long time. I wish this whole country, with all the stuff that's going on, we could get together and we could sing America the Beautiful. In fact, we used to do that. On 4th of July celebrations, we used to, I don't know if we do it anymore or not. We sang it in school growing up. That was how we became indoctrinated to how great America was. It was a good thing. We recall, we reattach to our nation that it is a beautiful nation, and the words of that hymn just like the one that Pastor Ted sang about taking God's hand. The words are there, the same thing, that we are a nation created and sustained by and for God. This is a country that is for God, full of blessings and full of God's grace. But it's not perfect. We know that. There's a great line in there. It says, America, America, God mend thine every flaw. It recognizes that we are still a nation that's on the journey to perfection, just like humans are. We recognize that. We got that. But what it cries out for is a hymn that God would mend our imperfections, not violence and not politics. God will mend our every flaw is the prayer of that hymn. And I wish we could sing that together as a nation. And I remember when we did, but there's a lot of our citizens now who no longer want to look to God to help mend our flaws. They're no longer looking for grace from God to work in our nation. So I'm not so sure we could even agree to sing it together. Many of our citizens have rejected the idea that there is a God or that our country is of God. And we have communal pressure for us to join that, and we need a communal response. But for me and my house, for this congregation of 30-some people, and we may be the last on the planet to do it, but we're going to stand up like we did and sing America the Beautiful. And confess that although we have our flaws, it is God's grace that we look to and trust to mend us to the people God would have us to be. So our prayerful response to communal pressure is a courageous and community response that remains steadfast in proclaiming God's grace and God's goodness throughout the land. And that we are strong with each other and being strong in that. Amen? Let's go to the Lord in prayer. God, you are always providing us strength. You are always providing us courage. You are always providing us grace for every situation in our life. Forgive us when we don't choose to have that be a part of us. Forgive us when we go our own. Forgive us when we give in to all the pressures. Grant that we might become profiles of courage, that we will find grace within us and guts and courage within us to stand up for you and what you are. Thank you that your grace is amazing, that your grace is sufficient for all of our needs. Lord, give us the radical grace that we need for radical pressure. Give us the holy grace we need for temptation pressure. Give us the graceful perspective for the artificial pressure on us. Give us spiritual grace for the internal pressure we feel inside us. And give us the communal grace that we might be together to respond to communal pressures, that we might proclaim you and your goodness and your kingdom through Jesus. Let us be profiles in courage because of your grace that lives in our lives. We pray this in your name, Jesus. Amen.